This 10-minute video helps Agile team to build the software easier to use by end users. So why some interfaces hard to use and what Agile team can do about it? I'm Natalia Cymbalenka, a solution consultant, Eastbanc Technologies. Apart from managing projects, I evangelize internally and externally on cross-functional communication while building the software. And my primary interest is incorporating UX design processes into Agile culture. So why some interfaces harder to use than others? The simple answer, interfaces that have lots of controls slow down the user to perform his or her task. These interfaces are harder to understand and interact with. But the true question is, how do you reduce complexity of the system for better UX? And I propose for Agile team this process you can incorporate in your Agile development, even though you don't have a dedicated UXer. So first of all, the theory first. So developers use implementation model when they build the software. So when developers developing the software, the true experts of the system, so they understand how the system behaves and works in reality, and design that model called implementation model that reflects technology. The problem is the users who use this system, not an expert, not the experts of the system. So they have their own idea how the system should behave. And the overall expectations, how they think they will interact with the system and how system will respond to them, the designers called a mental model of the user. So what designers usually do, they try to come up with the presented model that closely match the mental model. So the closer the match between the represented model and the mental model, the more successful design is, and it's intuitive for the target users. So the answer for the question, how do you make your software intuitively understood by the end users? You need to be aware of the user's mental model and build your interfaces based on that rather than implementation model. And this is the challenge. In your Agile team, you have lots of developers who really understand the system, but they're not the target users and users of the system. So here's the process I'm suggesting for your Agile team, how you can uncover the mental model and how do you implement the represented model in your interface. So first you need to understand your users, and it might be simple to say that you just research your users. UX research field has different types of methodologies and techniques, and based on the context, you use one or another methods to understand your users. So before you start your research, I highly recommend that you read about the user research discipline, and at least you need to understand what method is applicable for a specific situation. For example, for greenfield project, when you don't have yet product, but you have an idea, the applicable method is observe the user. Once you observe the user, you see how they perform current task, what are their goals, why they perform that task, and what language do they use while they're performing the task. And this information is critical before you move on to develop your system. At the end of research, you come up with the affinity diagram or mind map, whatever you call it. But basically, it's just key takeaways, highlights from your research that you can somehow group together, and you can see the emerged trends that influence what features are important for the users, what features will help them to resolve the current pain points, or the sequence of the activity they used to perform, so you can see emerge user flows in your product. So once you got it, you able to move on to your scope and your requirements, and you also need to know and keep in mind the language, how the user label the activity or objects they use for this task. And why it's critical? Because when you develop your system, you usually use some labels or navigations as well. You group information together, and this all activities go under information architecture discipline. So that discipline is all about how do you arrange parts of something to be understandable. And another close discipline to this one is information design. How do you represent information to foster understanding of the system? And the main artifact of this phase, when you consciously engage into in building information architecture, is the wireframes. So either product owner or you have your business analyst in the team, they might be a perfect people who will perform information architecture and will deliver wireframes to the Agile team developers. It's usually best to have your users back on this stage so you can validate your information architecture with them. So what you can do, you can have your wireframes arrange an interactive flow, what we call it, interactive prototype, and have your users to use this system so they can do early usability testing using your interactive prototype with low fidelity mockups, wireframes. So once you've done that, I propose just move that to developers so they can develop the actual system based on your wireframes. I don't think that every product should have a high fidelity mockup. It depends on your specific needs. Usually what I see, if you engage the visual designers earlier, you might end up having a high fidelity mockups that usually do not reflect the whole system user flow or interaction or even labels. The reason is we don't have enough requirements at the beginning of development of the product in Agile culture. So the designer is just guessing what we might come up with as a feature in our product. So you just consider for yourself whether you need to have a visual designer in the early stages of your development. You might be fine with just the wireframes that you can validate with your end users. To sum up all the process, how do you make your interface easier to use? Here are 3 steps. So first, if you don't have yet UX design skills or practices and processes in your team, first you need to do is educate your team. Educate on implementation versus mental models so they understand why some interfaces are harder to use. Once they got it, you can move close to the user research so they can have an idea why you're performing the user research. So you can uncover the mental model and construct the represented model. And lastly, some of your members of your team should understand information architecture as well as information design principles, so you can implement them while you do wireframing of your product. Once the education is over and you feel your Agile team is on a board to engage with the UX design process, you need to do research of your users. Once you research them, you're able to apply information architecture and information design principles on your wireframes to closely reflect the mental model of your target audience. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video.